Great, thanks, David. How are you doing?
Good, good. In this lentiest of Lents ever, continuation from last year, how's Lent going on over on your end?
Honestly, it just feels nice that it feels kind of normal. So I remember last year, we were halfway through having a great Lent, and then it came to a grinding halt. This year, we
Mm,
know how to do it. So, to see the number of people that came out for Ash Wednesdays, the number of people making the effort to come to daily Mass or to Stations of
mm,
the Cross, it's great. And I know people are praying at home too, because we did some resources last year, put them online. And so, I think both in church and in people's own family groups, we kind of know how to roll with the COVID flow by now. And
hmm
kind of do Lent however we can.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Father, first and foremost, thank you for all the work that you're doing. And for those who are not familiar with you, you want to tell us where you are and a little bit of your role.
Sure, I'm coming to you from the lovely Lower Church of St. Francis Xavier Church in Acushnet, Massachusetts. Been pastor here for the last few years, and it's a beautiful little community just off the north end of New Bedford. So if any of you would ever like to come and see it, our doors are open every day. We'd love to have you stop by.
Wonderful. Yes, great, great little parish. I loved when I got to visit there when I first came here. And thank you so much, not only for your hospitality, but also a little plug. In a couple of weeks, we'll be back there again at St.
Great.
Francis on
Yep.
March 21st for a fourth watch. So an evening of adoration, reconciliation, and a talk at 6:30 p.m. You can find more information about that on our Facebook page at fallriverfaithformation.org. But Father Riley, thank you so much for being willing to have it there and to invite people back to the Eucharistic presence.
Sure. And I mean, for anyone who hasn't gone to one, I was privileged to go to the last one, which is also the first one at St. Julie's, and it was just powerful. And I mean, for myself, as not quite a kid anymore, but to see so many members of our youth group really get something profound out of it, and especially to be connected a little bit better with youth from around the diocese was such a powerful experience. And so, David, thanks for the invitation so that we can bring this graced event here to St. Francis.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we're here to talk about Lent. We talk about, hope. There's our second Lent in the ring, so to speak, with COVID. And there's three pillars traditionally to Lent that we observe as Catholics: fasting, prayer, and almsgiving. And I want to talk about the first one, which is probably the one that people either avoid or don't really know what to make of, which is fasting. So, Father, can you tell us a little bit about what is fasting? Why do we do it, and why do we even need it?
Okay, well, I mean, I think it's the simplest definition of fasting is it's giving something up. And so to what you said before, I think it's something that in one sense we do really well, but on the other sense, we don't really know why we do it. So we think of Lent, sometimes we treat it almost like a diet, give up candy, give up some sort of, drink or entertainment. And it's like we give it up for Lent. And it's almost like we want to make ourselves, I don't know, not experience as much pleasure. But then when Easter comes, it's just kind of we get these things back. And I think the big question is, well, what is fasting's lasting spiritual benefit supposed to be? And kind of the way that I explain it is that, well, first, what does fasting involve? It's not things that are bad anyway. So, I made the joke one time, and I heard someone say they're going to give up swearing for Lent. And I said, well, what are they going to do on Easter? So it's like fasting isn't giving up stuff we shouldn't do anyway. Fasting is giving up good stuff. So it might be like I've given up listening to the radio in the car or listening to music in the car and certain kinds of food. But what I found is the spiritual meaning of fasting, and this is something that came, after years of kind of giving things up when I was younger, is that what it makes me do is a couple of things. One is it makes me think, do I maybe get too wrapped up in these things? We only have so much time during the day. We only have so much energy to give to certain things. And so, if it matters so much to me that I get to do this or that thing that, maybe aren't the most important things in my life, but perhaps have a little more of a hold on me than they should, well, maybe it's good to step back, in a sense, to show to myself that, no, I still am in control over these things by taking a little bit away from them. But what
Mm,
this does for me too is it pokes me, because then I notice that I'm missing these things. And this is another spiritual benefit of fasting, and the second of the three I'm going to talk about. And so when it pokes me, when I notice, okay, I'm missing this thing, and I really notice that, it makes me think about, okay, so I've been thinking so much about this thing. Do I think this much about God? Do I
mm,
think this much about other people in my life? So the fast, when I feel that little pinch of having given something up, I realize it makes me do is think, okay, I'm so focused on this kind of silly thing that I gave up for a month and a half. But then what are the more important things that I can do in my life? And in a
Hmm.
way, if I could offer it, this last year has been a fast. Because you think, what has it made us do? We've had to give up a lot of things and then realize, we can get along without them. I mean, not everything. Thank goodness sports have come back, but there's some other things. But what did it make us do? Think last springtime. Who did we realize were important? The essential
Mm,
workers, the people who work in the grocery stores, the doctors and nurses these people who have always been doing their work, but we haven't always paid attention to them the way we should have. And so
hmm,
that little pinch of having our life change last spring made us kind of realize, okay, there are these people doing great things faithfully all the time.
hmm.
And so it's important that we recognize them, but we couldn't have done that unless we were pulled away from other things. And
Sure.
yeah, and so then the third thing, and then I'm sure you have some other questions, is
Sure.
responsibility. And
Mm,
because I think what are sins, but it's when I make a wrong choice in life. And so, in a sense, what fasting does is I give up pleasures that otherwise are good because at other times in my life, I've gone after pleasures that aren't good. Because you think every sin is, in a way, a pleasure. And so, what I'm doing then by fasting is taking responsibility because prayer is good and almsgiving is good. They're the other two pillars of Lent. But in a sense, if we have this attitude, well, I've done bad things, so I can just do good things. Well, okay, that's good, but I still have to take responsibility for the bad choices I've made.
mm,
So our life isn't just one of action upon action, but also one of reflection. And so again, that little pinch that fasting gives me kind of wakes me up, and it's like, okay, notice that I've, say, given up chocolate for Lent, for example.
hmm.
Okay, so that matters so much to me, but by giving that up, I'm taking responsibility for some of the other bad choices that I've made.
Mm. Gosh, Father, so much and so little that you've given us here on fasting. Who knew fasting was so profound? Um, but I love what you really said there, and you said a couple of times of it gets us to reassess what's really important, what's really priority.
Right.
I don't know if you remember, like several years ago on Netflix, there was a series that was called like Minimalism or The Minimalist that came out, and there's a big movement about living minimalistically. What is
Hmm.
exactly we need, and I think part of that was geared towards what is our carbon footprint and that. But I think of this idea of what the church calls us to think of at the beginning of Lent was Jesus going out into the desert, and he has nothing.
Hmm.
Again, when he sends out the disciples, he says, don't take a second tunic, don't take a staff, don't take anything. This idea of when you start the journey, when you want to be transformed by God, get rid of everything, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and let God tell you what you need.
Mm.
And isn't that such a great image? I will rush to get a bag of Cape Cod chips at Stop and Shop. Like, I will always remember to get those. But do I remember to pick up my rosary beads? Do I
Mm.
remember to be charitable, especially that person who I don't want to be charitable about? And I can find ways to rationalize why I shouldn't be charitable about them. When you take everything else out and focus what's really important, it goes back to the greatest commandment, to love God above all else. And that's what Lent calls us to do. So I really love that concept. It helps us figure out what's your
Mm.
priority. Now, I will
Mhm.
say this, because you bring up a good point, and you have the pinch of this year. I think it's generous. I think it's been an Indian burn of this past year, quite frankly. Um, there are some that are saying, well, I've already given up so much. Why do I need to engage in fasting again this Lent? Why should we take up anew this call to fasting this Lent when we've given up so many things already due to the pandemic?
Well, hey, that's a great question. And one of the fathers of the church, I want to say it might have been St. John Chrysostom, but someone can look that up to be sure, said that, part of fasting is solidarity. So I think, yeah, we've all given up certain things. And I look at my life, I've had to make changes, but have I really lost that much? I've been inconvenienced, but have I really lost that much? And so one thing I think about when I'm fasting or maybe eating less, there's people that do this all the time. And actually, so like the fathers of the church make a connection between fasting and almsgiving, that what we
Hmm.
save on fasting, So we don't go out for that nice meal, or we get, a little, we have rice instead of like some fancy dinner. Give that to the poor. And so there's a connection between the fasting, so kind of letting go some of what I have to share more with others. And so we can say
Hmm.
there's a social justice dimension to fasting too, that it shows. So you think of, we've been inconvenienced, we might have lost some things. How many people live like that all the time, even
Mm,
in good times? And
sure.
so fasting has that kind of social justice dimension, which is very valid for us as Catholics, that, okay, it's me showing my solidarity, in a sense, entering into the state of being of someone who is always going without.
It's a really good point. So on that note, there will be some people I'll talk to that will say, "Well, this year I'm not going to give up something up. I'm going to start doing something." And I always found that interesting because it's like, well, that doesn't really seem to be the same. I mean, I, what would you say in response to that? To someone say, I'm not going to give something up. I'm going to start doing something.
Yeah, no, and that's kind of how I used to think too. But that's why after praying, I came up with that word responsibility, because it's something where, if I hurt someone, I can't just be nice to someone else and say, okay, I've balanced
Mm,
out the karma of the universe. But no, I have to go back and be reconciled to that person I hurt. And so again, fasting is taking responsibility, because it makes me realize that I'm not just a person of action, but I'm also, just in my own inner spiritual life, there has to be an account taking. And
mm,
so that idea of, yeah, like personal responsibility, that I feel that pinch and no one else knows that I'm doing it, but still, nevertheless, I'm in a sense taking responsibility for the heart hurt I have caused others, not by hurting myself, but more just by, like I said, inconveniencing myself, to make me realize that, yes, this is me not making up for my sins. That's what Christ did on the cross. But it's at
sure.
least me hopefully waking up my conscience a little more to the effects of what it is when I cause hurt to someone else.
Yeah. I mean, I always found fasting in whatever way that we choose, because we each have to discern, right? How the
Mhm.
Lord might be calling us to fast and what he's calling us to fast from. And in any case, though, fasting builds discipline. Like I think of an athlete.
Mm.
Like I know I don't look like someone who is good at fasting, right? But at one point in time, I did play sports, and you had to give things up. You had to give up your time. You had to give
Mhm.
up energy. You had to eat a certain way if you wanted to be a good athlete. There's a lot of things that an athlete is willing to give up in order to reach that prize. And I'm just struck by Paul's words of run as if to win the race.
Mhm.
And so when we think of, we're all kind of athletes for Christ. We're all Red Sox or Celtics for Christ. What do we need to do to get to the championship that is heaven? And that's going to naturally require a sacrifice. And that's such a different mindset than today, where we're told get as much as you can while you still can. I'm struck by the amount of people that rush to stores for toilet paper
Yeah.
when the pandemic started. And I get it; it's a natural human response. We panicked. We didn't know. Totally understand. But what a gift then fasting isn't, because if we can build that discipline, then instead of being reactionary people, we can be more responsary people.
Mm.
And be more intentional. And that's just, I mean, I can get better at that. We all get better at that. But, that's the benefit I've seen of fasting in my own life, even in a small way. Now, I have to bring this up. Does the church have an issue against the meat industry when every Friday during Lent it says, do not eat, red meat? So can you talk to us, what's the difference between fasting and abstinence, and why not eat meat to begin with?
Sure. Well, I think what helps is to look at the history a little bit. Imagine it being living 800 years ago, and like our ancestors were in whatever country they came from, and think like meat was a luxury item, right? Like I don't,
Mm,
people, peasants in medieval Europe wouldn't go to the grocery store and pick up a nice steak. They might have meat just a few times a year. And so, or, pork or steak or whatever. And so to give up meat was to give up something that was really nice. So we might compare it to
mm,
like giving up lobster. And so the idea though was that fish was very simple. It was something basic. But actually what I've learned, which is kind of interesting, is that the real traditional practice of the church was basically go vegan for Lent. And this is
mm,
something that has surprised me, even as late as maybe 125 or so years ago. Basically, during Lent, you would be a dieting vegan. So you'd have one vegan meal once a day and then two vegan snacks, because that meant no animals, but also no animal products. So no milk, no eggs, no butter. So things like that. And so in a way, it's something that almost like we've gone full circle, and people are kind of going back to that because of other reasons. But in a sense, the church was being vegan before anyone else was. And there's
Mm,
some monasteries that still don't ever eat meat the whole year. They've given up meat their whole life. And so it's an idea that we're not so much against meat, but it's more we take a step back from those things. And so, like for me, like not a huge vegetarian, but during Lent, I'll try and work those things in a little bit more because, it's something
mhm.
it's a little more simple, but also, appreciate it a little bit more too. And just
Yeah.
one thing that can help with this, one thing that's helped me, look up Orthodox fasting recipes because
Okay.
they still largely maintain the discipline of going vegan for Lent. So if you want some good, just, healthy, basic Lenten meals, look up Orthodox Lenten recipes and you'll find some different resources. And so it's, healthy food that's also simple. And to be honest, David, what I find when I, simplify my food during Lent, then Easter really is Easter.
Mm. Well, there's a link to the first thing off Google that is an Orthodox fast. And so if you're listening to this and you happen to be vegan, come and join the Catholic Church. 'Cause it sounds like we have a tradition, or at least the Eastern Rite churches that do a little bit more. Wow, we've really kind of lightened up, so I will not complain with that. Um,
Yeah, and
and
actually, so one of the things that you think back in the 1960s, we did lighten up, or we seemed to. There used to be the rule, no meat any Friday of the year, and
mm,
before earlier, there's even no meat on the vigils of certain feasts. And what Paul VI said wasn't we don't do that anymore. He's saying still do it, but do it on your own initiative.
mm,
So kind of what we have during Lent is like the bare minimum. And I know one of my friends in seminary said it's kind of like when as a family we get together and say, okay, we're all going to do this together. So the idea of Meatless Friday is during Lent, and and then the fast on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday doesn't mean we can't do anything else. So I mean, we could go back to the old discipline, maybe try fasting every Friday during Lent. Just
mm,
having one large meal and two snacks, or try, like I said, going vegan Fridays in Lent, or
mm,
vegetarian every Friday, certain days of Lent. So he's saying it not that we do it less, but that we're supposed to try and work it into our own lifestyle.
mhm.
And so, because for some people, obviously, to be vegan would involve a lot more work than it would just kind of eating simple, meat meals on weekdays during Lent. So it's kind
Yeah.
of we're called to find our own way to do it, but all of us are called to fast, but in our own way.
Sure. And I think that's the ultimate goal, right? Is
Exactly.
to discomfort ourselves, disrupt our normalcy so we can focus again on what's important. That's the real, that's a great point of fasting. And the Bishops' Conference, the US at least, have made it clear, those who either have an illness or terminal illness, are breastfeeding or pregnant, are exempt from this idea because it's understood that, in that regard, I think of the pregnant or breastfeeding mother, you
Mm.
have to eat food to produce food for your children. It would be uncharitable to fast that regard to your children. So there's also needs to be, I think, an understanding for some people of what the church calls to in fasting and what it allows. Because at the end of the day, it's supposed to not be an end unto itself, but really a means to help us prioritize who God is. Um, yeah, I'm gonna. That makes my childhood makes so much more sense now, Father, because every Friday we only eat fish in my household. Man,
Mhm.
that's a very Portuguese thing, but it makes sense now where it's coming from, that yearly thing. So I certainly invite individuals to explore that. Um, you know, we've talked a lot about fasting in general. What would you say might be if someone's looking to incorporate fasting as a general discipline in their life, maybe even outside of that, what would be 3 tips that you would give, especially if they've really struggled with the idea of fasting before?
Okay, so one of the things I would do is that look at what in your life do you spend a lot of time doing, or what are the things that give you pleasure in life? Because the point of fasting isn't to get rid of all pleasure from life, but it's more just to kind of show that we can still control it. So it's almost like mind over matter, that my spiritual will is stronger than my bodily desires. So
Mm,
think, maybe if someone, I don't know, always listens to the music in the car like I do. So, just learn to turn that off and not to go cold turkey and never listen to it again, but say on Fridays the day when Jesus died for us on the cross, just turn it off then, or do something like that, because that's the second thing. So first, look for something that you're going to notice missing from your life. The second thing, though, is make it manageable. So it doesn't mean never eat chocolate again, never have a beer again, never listen to the radio again. No, yeah, don't worry. So, like I said, make it manageable. So make it so it's something that wakes you up, because that's the point of fasting. It's not just to take away pleasure from our life, but it's that by clearing it out, can we be a little more focused? But if we get rid of it altogether, then sometimes just the way we are, we might focus too much on that. So it should be enough, like the little pinch to wake us up, but not like knocking us out of bed and then hitting us with a pillow. And the third thing I would say is don't get discouraged, because fasting should be like a habit that's built up. But sometimes people try maybe be a little too ambitious and then not be able to follow through. And they'll say, that's it. I've fallen off the wagon. I'm giving up. But no, so, make a plan, make it reasonable, but then just don't get discouraged. And if you fall a little bit short or something, make it up somehow else, and then just keep back on the rhythm. Because, especially the church says, even if we don't do Meatless Fridays throughout the year, Fridays are still a day of penance. And so in the US, we can do another act of penance. But just, to make every Friday a day when we're missing something, then for me, it wakes me up and makes me think, okay, Jesus died for me this day. Am I focusing on him as much as I should if I can notice this other thing missing from my life?
Sure. That's a really good point. And those are some really good tips. And I'm going to drop another link in the comments for individuals. If you're looking for something a little bit more throughout the year, there's a great challenge called Exodus 90, which is built